You know, at the very heart of modern African politics, there's this really deep and persistent tension. It's a constant pull between the continent's rich indigenous traditions and, well, the structures of the modern state. So today, we're going to dive into what it actually means to stand at that crossroads.
And this slide just lays out that conflict perfectly. On one side, you've got traditional systems. Think communal, consensus-based, like a council of elders where authority comes from respect, not just a vote. And on the other side, modern statehood. This is often an inheritance from the colonial era. Centralized, based on majority rule, and built on Western models. These two worlds are just operating on completely different software.
So this isn't just some abstract political debate, you see. It's a really profound question of identity. The real challenge isn't about deciding which system is better. It's about figuring out how to forge a path forward that honors a deep cultural heritage while still meeting all the demands of the modern world.
To really get a grip on this, we've got to go back in time. So how did these two worlds collide so forcefully in the first place, and what's been the fallout from that collision? The story really kicks off in the colonial era. This was a period that didn't just redraw borders on a map. It fundamentally went in and rewired the continent's entire political DNA.
And make no mistake, this was a deliberate process. European powers didn't just add new systems on top of old ones. They actively dismantled traditional African ways of governing, labeling them primitive or backward. It was a psychological game, really, designed to erase indigenous knowledge and replace it with Western ideals, all to make it easier to control things and extract resources.
And this quote just brilliantly captures the depth of the problem. Thinkers like Frantz Fanon argued that colonialism wasn't just a physical occupation. It was a cultural and psychological assault. So true freedom, that meant decolonizing the mind itself, reclaiming the very identity that had been pushed down for so long.
So fast forward to the 1950s and 60s. As African nations started gaining their independence, they basically inherited these ready-made, centralized bureaucratic states. The defining struggle of this whole post-colonial era became this exact tension. How do you manage these structures you were handed while also trying to reconnect with your own authentic indigenous traditions?
So, what actually happens when these modern political structures don't have deep guiding principles? To see the consequences play out in the real world, let's take a look at a case study from Nigeria.
But first, let's be clear on what we mean by party ideology. The easiest way to think about it is like the soul of a political party. It's their core beliefs, their vision for society. Basically, it's their roadmap. It tells you, the voter, what this party actually stands for and what they promise to do if they get into power.
Okay, so research into Nigeria's current political era, which is called the Fourth Republic, points to a really critical problem. This idea of ideological bareness. That very soul we just talked about, it seems to be missing. The political parties just aren't defined by any clear vision or set of principles.
And this quote from the research is just incredibly telling. It's basically saying that if you stripped away the names and the logos, the major political parties in Nigeria are virtually the same. And when that's the case, voters are left choosing between personalities, not actual policies.
And the consequences of that are severe. Without that ideological anchor, you have politicians crossing the carpet all the time, just switching parties for their own personal gain. Politics becomes all about individuals, not about the public good. National development becomes choppy and unstable. The parties can't even manage their own internal fights, and that chaos just spills over, creating national instability. So the huge takeaway from Nigeria's experience is this. Just adopting the look of modern democracy isn't enough. Without a meaningful ideological foundation, one that could even be rooted in those authentic traditions we talked about, the structures themselves can actually become vehicles for chaos and self-interest.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? This brings us to a really compelling idea that's been gaining a lot of ground across the continent, the search for a synthesis.
So instead of this binary choice, tradition or modernity, a lot of African philosophers and leaders are pushing for a third way. The idea is to create these hybrid models of governance that integrate the strengths of traditional systems, like being communal and consensus-based, with the functional institutions of a modern state.
And hey, this isn't some brand new idea. We're talking about visionaries like Kwame Nkrumah with his push for Pan-Africanism, or Leopold Senghor, who championed the idea of negritude. They were trying to build modern states that were deeply grounded in African identity. And of course, through his incredible writing, Chinua Achebe showed everyone the vital importance of preserving traditions in a world that was changing so fast.
This whole concept is captured perfectly by the post-colonial theorist Homi Bhabha. He talked about a third space of hybridity. It's not just a simple 50-50 mix, but a new, dynamic space where different cultural and political ideas interact to create something totally new and authentic.
But does this idea of a hybrid government actually work in the real world? Let's look at some data. This chart here compares political stability in Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. What we're about to see is how that balance between traditional and modern governance might actually be linked to these numbers.
And the takeaway is pretty striking. If you look at Nigeria, which has the lowest political stability score on that chart, you see a major imbalance, with modern governance structures often just overriding the traditional ones. But then you look at South Africa and Kenya, which have higher stability scores, and you see they found more of a balance. The data really suggests that when these two systems are more integrated and work together, it tends to correlate with greater political stability.
So, what does this all mean? We've gone from the colonial imposition to the challenges of post-independence politics, and now to the search for a hybrid solution. And this is so much more than just an academic debate. It's really about the search for authentic, effective governance that actually works for people.
So, what are the big insights to take away from all this? First, the real challenge isn't about choosing between the past and the future, but about integrating them. Second, we've seen how modern political systems without a real philosophical soul can actually create instability. Third, these hybrid models aren't just a theory, they offer a practical path towards stability. And finally, and this is crucial, you have to remember that this is a living, breathing debate that is actively shaping the future of an entire continent right now.
Ultimately, this whole explainer points to a really powerful conclusion. The most resilient, legitimate, and stable path forward for many African nations might just be found in this creative synthesis, weaving together indigenous values with adaptable, modern political structures. And that leaves us with a final, big question to chew on, and it really goes far beyond Africa. In this globalized world, where cultures and systems are mixing and merging everywhere, what does it truly mean to build a government that is both effective on the world stage and authentic to its own people?